Welcome to the deep dive. We're absolutely thrilled to have you with us today because the stack of sources we're looking at covers a story that is, well, it's almost too massive for just one
It
lifetime.
really is. It's an incredible narrative.
Yeah. Today we are looking at a towering figure in both sports and culture, the legendary Montreal Canadiens right-winger Maurice "Rocket" Richard.
And we're pulling from an incredibly comprehensive Wikipedia biographical archive today. It details not just his NHL history, but his massive, undeniable cultural footprint in Canada and honestly beyond.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to really understand that evolution. We want to figure out how a quiet, completely unassuming machinist from Montreal transformed into this unstoppable, almost terrifying force on the ice.
Right.
And beyond that, how he became this mythological figure whose impact was so profound that it sparked a literal riot and helped shape the Quebec cultural history of an entire province.
It's a journey from the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic ladder during a really difficult time in history.
Yeah, the Depression.
Exactly. From there to the very pinnacle of athletic and cultural immortality. And the sources provide some fantastic, highly specific details about how that happened.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting at the very beginning. Maurice Richard's start in life was the furthest thing from glamorous. We're talking about Montreal during the absolute lowest points of the Great Depression.
Yeah, it was tough.
You really have to picture the environment he grew up in. His father, Onésime, actually lost his job during this period. The family had to rely on government aid just to survive.
Right. It was a household totally defined by economic anxiety and hard labor.
Yeah.
And that financial reality forced a lot of difficult decisions. For Maurice, it meant dropping out of school entirely at the age of 16.
Just to work.
Yeah, he didn't have the luxury of focusing on athletics or education. He went straight to work as a machinist to help support his family.
Which makes his eventual path to the NHL so improbable, He
Yeah.
wasn't some pampered prodigy groomed for superstardom from the time he could walk.
Not at all. In fact, what the sources highlight here is that he didn't even play organized hockey until he was 14 years old.
Which is incredibly late.
Oh, it's late for anyone, especially a future Hall of Famer. Instead of organized drills, he developed his foundational puck handling skills by playing a very unstructured backyard game called Hog.
Hog. I love this detail. For those of you who don't know, you're just out there on the ice. And the entire goal of the game is simply to keep the puck away from everyone else for as long as humanly possible.
Oh, right. No passing, no plays.
Just pure possession and survival.
Exactly. You can draw a direct line from playing Hog as a kid to the way he protected the puck as a professional. But even with that raw skill, his path was incredibly rocky. What's fascinating here is the massive irony of his early career reputation.
Well, the injuries.
Yeah. When he finally did start playing at a higher level, he suffered some really severe injuries. He broke his ankle and then he broke his leg.
And the scouts and observers at the time looked at this kid and slapped a label on him that just seems hilarious in retrospect. They called him too fragile for professional hockey.
Too fragile. And it wasn't just hockey scouts who thought so either.
Right.
The Canadian military actually rejected him for service during World War II because those bones hadn't healed properly. The sources note he was left with a permanently deformed ankle.
Wow.
And because of that deformity, he literally had to alter his natural skating style just to be able to move on the ice.
I want you, the listener, to just imagine the sheer resilience required to process that kind of humiliation. You are told you're too fragile to play the game you love. You are rejected by the military during a world war because your body is deemed broken.
And you have a deformed ankle.
Right. And instead of quitting, you channel all of that frustration into a historic NHL debut.
It's a testament to an unbelievable internal drive. He just completely willed himself past his physical limitations.
And speaking of his debut and those early days, there's a fantastic piece of trivia in the sources about his jersey number.
The famous number 9.
Right. Everyone knows Maurice Richard as the iconic number 9. But he didn't start with that number. He changed to number 9 in 1943 for a very specific personal reason.
It was for his daughter, right?
Yes. To match the birth weight of his newborn daughter, Huguette, who weighed exactly 9 pounds.
It's an incredibly sweet human detail about a guy who is about to become known as the most fearsome competitor in the sport. It humanizes him right before the sources describe his absolute explosion onto the professional scene.
Oh, explosion is definitely the right word. He joins a line that would become absolutely legendary. The punchline, playing alongside Toe Blake and Elmer Latch.
Such a great name.
Initially, his nickname was the Comet, but as he started to dominate, teammate Ray Getliff famously noted that Richard went in on the opposition's goal like a rocket.
And the greatest nickname in hockey history was born.
The Comet became the Rocket.
And that nickname perfectly encapsulated his playing style. You have to understand the era of hockey we're talking about.
Yeah, post-World War II.
Right. The sources describe it as gladiatorial. The rules were looser, the physical intimidation was constant, and players were routinely battered.
This wasn't the era of the neutral zone trap or elegant sweeping cross-ice passes.
Exactly. And Richard was not known for finesse. He was not a playmaker. One of his teammates actually joked that Richard wouldn't even pass the salt at the dinner table.
That's amazing.
He was a pure, ferocious, single-minded goal scorer. When he was attacking the net, the sources mentioned that his eyes would literally flash and gleam. They described his eyes as lighting up like a pinball machine.
Like a pinball machine. That is such a vivid, terrifying image if you're a goaltender. Just this intense, wild-eyed forward barreling down on you with a deformed ankle and zero intention of passing the puck.
Yeah, terrifying.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because that relentless drive culminates in the legendary 1944-1945 season. This is the season that cemented his mythological status. Maurice Richard scored 50 goals in 50 games.
It's hard to overstate how impossible that seemed at the time. Keep in mind that gladiatorial environment we just talked about. He wasn't just skating freely into the offensive zone.
No, they were all over him.
The sources describe opposing players literally draping themselves across his back, hooking him, holding him, doing absolutely anything to physically drag him down, and he was still scoring a goal a game.
You really need to grasp the magnitude of this achievement.
To put it in context for you, that 50 goals in 50 games record stood completely untouched for 36 years.
36 years.
It wasn't until Mike Bossy matched it in 1981 that anyone else even came close. It remains, to this day, one of the most celebrated and iconic achievements in the entire history of the NHL.
And if you want a single anecdote that captures the absolute physical madness of Maurice Richard, the sources give us the story of the 1952 unconscious goal.
Oh, this is incredible.
It's something out of a comic book. It's the semifinal game against the Boston Bruins. During the game, Richard takes a brutal hit and is knocked entirely unconscious.
He suffers a concussion, a serious head injury.
Right. He's taken off the ice, bleeding completely out of it. They stitch him up in the medical room. And then in the third period, still clearly dazed, he returns to the ice.
Unbelievable.
He gets the puck, weaves through the defense, and scores the game-winning goal.
While playing with a severe, freshly sustained concussion.
Yes. And there's a famous photograph from right after that game. It shows a completely bloodied, exhausted Richard shaking hands with the Boston goalie, who is literally bowing to him.
Wow.
It's an unbelievable image of respect forged through literal blood and sweat.
It's the ultimate display of his determination. But it also highlights the extreme physical abuse he was taking night after night. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that constant physical intimidation combined with Richard's incredibly explosive temper was creating a very dangerous pressure cooker.
Yeah, something had to give.
He was constantly targeted by opponents, and he rarely backed down, which put him in the crosshairs of the NHL establishment, specifically NHL President Clarence Campbell.
Which brings us to the boiling point. March 1955. This is where the story shifts from a sports biography to a major historical event.
The inciting incident happens on the ice. An opposing player, Hal Lako, strikes Richard in the head with his stick.
And Richard reacts.
Richard, true to his volatile nature, retaliates viciously. But in the ensuing chaos, Richard actually punches a linesman who was trying to restrain him.
Striking an official is the ultimate line you cannot cross in sports.
Exactly. And Clarence Campbell comes down with the hammer. He suspends Maurice Richard for the remainder of the regular season and the entirety of the playoffs.
Now, to understand what happens next, we have to look closely at the cultural backdrop of Montreal and Canada at the time. And the sources are very clear in how they map out this divide.
Yes. And we want to be very clear with you here. We are simply reporting the social climate as it is described in the historical records.
Right, just looking at the sources.
The sources note a stark division in the public reaction. In English Canada, Clarence Campbell was widely praised. He was seen as the authoritative figure who finally stepped in to control a player who had a history of violent outbursts.
Okay.
But in French Quebec, the perspective was entirely different. The suspension was viewed by many as a severe injustice perpetrated by the Anglophone establishment against a Francophone hero.
The sentiment described in the text is that Richard was being uniquely punished because of his background, and that Campbell represented an oppressive authority. Again, we aren't taking sides on the historical politics here, but you have to understand that this was the powder keg that the suspension ignited.
And that powder keg exploded on St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1955, at the Montreal Forum. Campbell, knowing the environment was hostile, decided to attend the Canadiens game anyway.
It is an unbelievable scene. You have to picture the Montreal Forum descending into absolute anarchy. The fans are furious. They start pelting Clarence Campbell with anything they can get their hands on.
Rotten vegetables, eggs, debris.
The tension is suffocating, and then someone actually detonates a tear gas bomb inside the arena.
The building has to be evacuated. The fire department is called in. The police are mobilized. Because of the sheer chaos and danger, the game is officially forfeited to the Detroit Red Wings.
But the chaos doesn't stop at the doors of the arena. The Richard Riot spills out into the streets of Montreal. A mob of roughly 20,000 people starts rioting along St. Catherine Street.
Smashing windows, overturning cars, looting stores.
The sources document the destruction at $100,000 in damages at the time.
Which, adjusted for inflation to $20-25, is about $1.16 million in damage. It was a massive civic disturbance.
And the immediate tragic consequence of all this for Richard. Because he was suspended, he sat out the rest of the season and watched as his teammate, Bernie Jeffrian, overtook him to win the scoring title by a single point.
Oh, it's brutal.
And to make matters worse, the Canadiens ended up losing the Stanley Cup that year.
It was a devastating blow, both personally and professionally.
Imagine you're Maurice Richard in that moment.
Yeah.
You're a guy who just wants to play hockey. And suddenly you are the center of a citywide riot. Your team forfeits a game, you lose the scoring title, and your team loses the cup. How do you even respond to that?
His response is actually one of the most remarkable parts of his legacy. He didn't fuel the fire. He took to the radio, speaking directly to the Francophone public, and he begged the city for calm.
Wow.
He asked the fans to stop the violence, and then he made a promise. He promised that he would take his punishment, serve his suspension, and return the following year to lead the team to the Stanley Cup.
A bold promise. But he delivered on it in a way that literally no one has ever done before or since. He came back, and he didn't just win one cup. He kicked off an unprecedented, untouchable dynasty.
Yeah, they were unstoppable.
The Montreal Canadiens went on to win 5 consecutive Stanley Cup championships from 1956 to 1960.
5 in a row. It is a record that still stands. And during that unbelievable run, he also achieved another major personal milestone. He became the first player in NHL history to score 500 career goals.
He practically invented the 500-goal club. He was the undisputed king of the sport. But eventually, time catches up with everyone. In 1960, at the age of 39, he retired.
Though the sources note that he didn't necessarily want to walk away.
Right.
He was essentially forced into retirement by the team's general manager, who was terrified that Richard, with his relentless, reckless style, was going to suffer a permanently debilitating injury.
Yeah, they had to protect him from himself. He left the game as the all-time leader with 544 career goals.
Which was an astronomical number at the time.
So what does this all mean for the man once the cheering stops? That is the fascinating transition. The text points out that life after hockey was actually a very human, sometimes awkward struggle for Richard.
Yeah, it was tough.
He went from being a god on ice to a man who legitimately feared being forgotten.
Right. He tried to stay connected to the game. He briefly took a coaching job in the World Hockey Association, the WHA.
But it didn't last.
No, the sources reveal he quit after just 2 games. He simply couldn't handle the stress of watching the game from behind the bench and not being able to physically impact it.
He also opened a tavern in Montreal, which was a common path for retired players back then. And he took on endorsements, pitching products like hair dye and car batteries.
Right?
There's something profoundly humbling about picturing the guy with the pinball machine eyes, the man who sparked a cultural uprising, standing in front of a camera, awkwardly trying to sell you a car battery.
This raises an important question. How does a man manage a myth that has grown so much larger than himself? Because even while he was selling hair dye, his cultural status was only solidifying. The sources mention Roker Carrier's classic short story, The Hockey Sweater.
Oh, this is a beautiful piece of Canadian
It
literature.
really is.
It's about a young boy in rural Quebec whose mother accidentally orders him a Toronto Maple Leaf sweater instead of Montreal Canadian sweater.
Which is a disaster.
It is treated like an absolute tragedy because every single kid in the village idolized Maurice Richard. They all wore his number 9. They all taped their sticks like him. They all slicked their hair like him.
That story really cemented Richard as a pan-Canadian icon. It showed that his influence wasn't just about statistics, it was about identity. He represented an ideal for kids all across the country.
And that reverence only deepened over the decades. Bringing the timeline up to the present, the sources cover his passing in the year 2000. It was an event of massive national significance. He was given a state funeral.
Which is an incredibly rare honor. The sources note that this was the very first state funeral ever held for a non-politician in the province of Quebec.
Yeah.
Over 115,000 people came to view his casket and pay their respects.
115,000 people, just
Yeah.
incredible. And his legacy continues to be recognized today. Looking at the latest 2025 updates from the archive, the Quebec government officially designated him a historic figure to mark the 25th anniversary of his death.
Yeah.
Plus, there's a brand new 2025 documentary simply titled Maurice that explores his life.
It just shows that the fascination with him hasn't faded. He is as relevant to cultural history now as he was when he was actively playing.
It really is an unbelievable arc. We started with a fragile Depression-era kid dropping out of school to work as a machinist. A kid who learned a stick handle by playing a chaotic game of hog in the backyard. And we watched him evolve into a man whose intense pinball machine eyes and 50 goals in 50 games record made him a literal god on ice. A man whose suspension was the spark that ignited a cultural awakening and a massive riot, and who answered that chaos by leading his team to 5 straight championships.
It's a phenomenal legacy, and it leaves you with a final thought to really chew on, something that isn't explicitly answered in the text but is impossible to ignore.
Oh.
Think about how heavy the crown of cultural symbolism really is. Maurice Richard once said that he was largely unaware of the complex political situation in Quebec at the time. He insisted he just wanted to play hockey and win with his teammates.
Right, he was just a player.
So ask yourself, how would a figure like Richard, a quiet man who preferred to speak only with his stick, fare in today's hyper-connected, heavily politicized media landscape, where every high-profile athlete is constantly pressured to be a vocal spokesperson for a movement?
That is a brilliant question to ponder. It really puts the weight of his era and ours into perspective. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring the incredible life of the Rocket as much as we did. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and above all, stay curious.